Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
Oh, my pleasure. So, I'm going to jump right into this. In my new book, I focus on strategies that sellers can use to amp up their sales. In other words, accelerate their sales. So, what's your definition of sales acceleration?
Well, I don't think I actually had a definition of sales acceleration, but if I were to take the term, it's how do you go from selling what you're selling right now to selling more and doing it faster? So I think it's something that we all want to do, and we all know is possible, that there's something that we should be doing today to make sure that our results come in faster and our results are as strong as possible. So it's not necessarily something I had a definition of, but I think it's certainly the universal pursuit when it comes to selling.
So what's holding sellers back from doing it faster, from selling faster?
Well, I think you have to ask every seller. So if I look at each different seller, there's something else there's something that keeps them from meeting their potential and unleashing their performance, and it's often different from someone else. But I'll give you some examples. I met someone recently that didn't have goals and an action plan. So while he was selling all day, he wasn't necessarily doing the things that were going to get him to the results. He was literally wasting time. So when we organized his time and organized his day, he realized that probably 30% of his activities were not actually going to help him reach his potential in sales and help him actually be successful. I knew another seller that was focusing on all of the right things, but when they were getting into conversations, they weren't leading them properly. They were turning buyers off. They weren't engaging them. They weren't finding out the variety of ways that they could actually add value to their business. So for this particular person, they were locked and loaded for what they were supposed to do, but when they actually engaged in the sales conversations, they weren't leading them properly. So I think that there are a series of universal things that we all know that sellers need to do to succeed, but which one of them each seller needs to do, it's individual for what's going to help them the most.
So if somebody's going to undertake a self-assessment to say, okay, I want to be able to accelerate my sales, where would they start that assessment in your opinion?
Well, I think they have to ask themselves, where am I going? A lot of times people don't have that end goal. They have a quota or they have a number, but they don't necessarily know why they're going to get there. They don't know if that's really possible, and they don't know what they need to do to achieve it. So once you have a goal and that goal is meaningful, and I don't just mean the number.
Right.
I mean the reason why you wake up and you feel passionate about what you're going to do, you can then break that down into what do I need to do this quarter to actually achieve that? And what do I need to do this month to get to my quarterly milestones? And then what do I need to do this week and today to actually make a dent in that? If you don't start off with the goal, then you can't break it down to the action plan. And I think when sellers do that, they become so much more confident when they wake up that they know that they're doing the things that they should be doing. They get a lot more of it done, and they do it better because of that confidence.
So for people who are watching this, give an example, if you can, of a goal or a couple goals that you would recommend people sort of focus on, the type of goal to focus on.
Yeah, so I know one which is all about cows. It was a cow farm. There's one guy who was living in his apartment, which was quite nice, with his family. It was a big apartment.
Yeah.
And what he really wanted was to live in the country and have 5 acres and have some farm animals.
Have cows, right.
Have cows. So he was constantly talking about this number that he had to reach, but he wasn't really attached to it. So what we did was we looked at what his income needed to be able to move 20 miles west of the city that he was living in to get a patch of land that was big enough to allow him to have a couple of horses, a couple of cows, and a couple of chickens. And he literally put a picture of that up in his office. So that was the why part of the goal. But that actually changed some of the numbers that he needed to achieve. Now, he was looking at his numbers, and then he hadn't broken them down into how many new conversations do I have to have every week or month to be able to get to the sales outcome. Because he knew what his first conversation to second conversation ratio was after we did a little bit of analysis.
Right.
He knew what his first conversation to a win was. All you had to do then is say, how many first conversations do I need to have that are good first conversations? So that changed. Like, he needed to double them.
Right.
So all of a sudden he was working harder, but not because I said, go work harder. You need twice as many conversations. He had the commitment, not the compliance, because he was doing it for himself.
Right.
And that was a big change.
And do you find, I certainly find in the work I do with companies, is that salespeople, in fact, I was writing about this today before we started this conversation, is that salespeople don't know those sort of critical ratios. I think in terms of people wanting to accelerate their sales, they need to understand, how many new conversations lead to second conversations, and how many, of my leads do I convert into orders, and so on. And do you find that same thing, that people just aren't aware, salespeople just aren't aware of what those sort of critical numbers are that they should know?
Yeah. Personally, some people just do that naturally, but it's a rare subset of people. I think at the mid-size and larger companies, it's done for them. And even though those numbers exist, individual salespeople, they don't even know what theirs are.
Right.
So it's like they have a batting average, but they don't know what their batting average is. Because they don't think like that. So I think a lot of sellers aren't wired to be analytical in that way about their own results. Many of them that are good at it, they would be what I would call unconscious competent.
Right.
They wake up and do it, and the money comes in, but if you were to break it down into its component parts, they would have no idea really what it is. If you ask them what makes you successful, they would have an answer.
Right.
But if you literally analyzed it, it would just oftentimes be something else.
Right. And so, I think this is such a critical thing for sellers, is how do you coach someone to, in your practice, how do you coach people to suddenly become more sensitized to this and to focus on these metrics that certainly are critical for them in order to be able to say, okay, I need to do something faster. I can't do something faster if I don't know how fast it's going today.
Yeah, so I think sales coaching is one of those areas that's really emerging for how to do it well. Now, the field of coaching has grown up over the last 20 or 30 years, but a lot of it is executive coaching, and a lot of it is personal development coaching. So with the executive coaching, the idea is that I'm going to work with you. So you're currently managing 500 people, but you're going to take over North America. You will be managing 5,000. And over the next couple of years, we have some developmental milestones we have to get you to prepare to lead these people. I'm not going to tell you the answers. We're going to work through a set of developmental goals, and then you're going to have experiences. We're going to talk about them. You're going to take some lunch over the course of 6 months or a year. You're going to meet some milestones and be different.
Right.
That's executive coaching. Personal development coaching is all, when I was living in a van down by the river and I had no money, I was doing this thing wrong and that thing wrong, and I just wasn't feeling, and I wasn't doing this. But then when I got my act together, I was able to succeed. Now I have this boat and that boat. That kind of Tony Robbins-y kind of thing.
Right.
So both of those have some application for sales, but a lot of the coaching says don't give someone the answer. I think that's a terrible thing to tell a sales manager. So your seller's working through a problem, they're trying to make a major sale, they're fumbling through some of it, you're asking them great questions, and then they're going to leave your office without your best advice for how to go close the deal. That's nuts. So there's a lot of things about coaching. And literally what you read about coaching, like coaching shouldn't give the answer. That's not for sales coaching. And I don't mean walk in, tell them what to do, and leave. But I'll just summarize it to say I think that there are 5 roles that a sales coach should play. That if you play these 5 roles really well, you'll help your people succeed. And I'll run through them quickly.
Sure.
One is they have to define those goals, and they have to help them define those action plans. Because without them, they're just waking up, making noise, and then going to bed and then waking up and making noise. The second is they wear a hat to help them execute. And that helps them get the most done. So that's time management, that's keeping the company off their back, that's keeping them focused on actually getting the right things done. Another one is motivating them and keeping their energy high. Some sales teams, I know the best managers meet with them for 10 minutes every morning.
Yes.
And for other sales teams, especially senior teams, that would be way overkill and kind of in the way. But there's something that the sales manager can do on a regular basis to make sure motivation stays as high as possible. That's the third. So we have define, execute, motivate. The third one is advise. That is contingent upon a sales manager to make sure when their sellers are going to engage the customer, engage the buyers, that they're doing the right things to the best that they know how. And the last part is to develop them. That in a year or two, you should be an order of magnitude better than you are today. And it's my role, it's a hat that I wear to make sure that you are on a path to get there and it's not random. So define, execute, motivate, advise, and develop.
Mm-hmm.
Five roles of a sales coach.
Right. So can an individual salesperson that sets out and say, look, I want to really boost my sales. I want to accelerate the sales that I'm working on. Can they do that on their own, or do they need that sales coaching?
I think that it's the rare person that can do that on their own.
Okay.
I think that there are some people that can do that on their own, and they oftentimes are salespeople now, and either they're just making a ton of money doing what they're doing, or they end up running companies.
Right.
Because they can do it for themselves, and they end up translating that to other people. But it's really hard to build a development plan for yourself when you can't see yourself, when you don't have any context for what other people are a lot better at.
Right.
It's very hard to advise yourself on how to do something better that you're not seeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things that, even Tiger Woods has a coach.
Right.
That if you want to get better, no matter where you are at your game, working with someone else is typically a much more fruitful path.
Right.
Even if you're independent, hire a sales coach.
Right. Yeah, or have a mentor of some sort. So last question on sort of that development side is in your mind, I probably know the answer based on what you said, are salespeople born or are they made?
I think that they're born made.
Mm-hmm.
To give a definitive answer to that
right.
one. So let's think of it like basketball. There are some people that if you give them a basketball, they can dribble and shoot. But if you put them on a court to go win, then they really don't know the game yet.
Mm-hmm.
But they have the natural talent to dribble, shoot, pass, and play defense. But then they need to understand the rhythm and flow of how to do it so you can actually play against someone and play with other people.
Right.
So they're born and they're likely to be successful, but they have to be shaped into actually knowing how to play the game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with the born versus made, with a lot of practice and a lot of coaching, some people will make the junior varsity team. Then there are some other people that, with no practice and no coaching, they start in varsity.
Mm-hmm.
However, they're not likely to play college unless they have really good coaching and really good practice and dedicate themselves.
Right.
Unless they do the part that's made. Then maybe they'll make college. So there is a natural level of talent that is innate in everyone, and it's on a spectrum. But it's the work that you do in the made part that actually gets you to be a winner on whatever team you're likely to be a winner on.
Right. So, yeah, I think in sales, in my opinion, people with a lot of skills still need to have a really well-defined sales process. What's sort of your opinion on the role of process versus the role of the individual, I guess, in terms of attaining their goals?
Yeah, so there's actually there's lots of writing over the years to say sellers that follow a dynamic process and sales teams that follow a dynamic process are much more likely to get from stage to stage. And when I say stage to stage, I mean having a first conversation, having a second conversation, getting a proposal, presenting and negotiating, and winning. That if you actually follow, I don't want to call it a rigid, but let's call it a sophisticated process of knowing how to get to the next steps, they can be more successful. There are some things written in the Harvard Business Review recently to say throw out your sales process. That's not what it's about.
Right.
So one of the things as we're a sales training and sales performance improvement company, but we don't care what you actually have to do to succeed. So, for example, there's been a lot of talk these days about how throw out consultative selling and replace it with some other kind of pushy or challenger kind of selling.
Right.
Like, completely get rid of it. Harvard Business Review, end of solution sales. I didn't have a position on that, so we did research on it. So when we do research on process, even today, it looks to us that if you have a process and you know which way you're going to flow, that you're likely to be a lot more successful than without. So we're process advocates because the current data suggests that if you just spin like the Tasmanian devil to see what ends up getting whipped up, then you're not likely to get as strong results than if you're a little bit more engineering oriented about how you move from stage to stage to stage.
Right. So in terms of accelerating your sales process, then what are the key aspects of the process that are most important to focus on? If you're a VP of sales in a corporation, let's say you're new to a company and you've got sort of this 30-day window where you're trying to assess what's going on and sort of start creating some momentum internally. What parts of the process are you going to focus on?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you the overall, and then I'll talk about a couple of specifics.
Sure.
So overall, when I look at sales managers, they are diving in at the end of the sales process to try to help people win the sale, win a negotiation, get it over the line. There are some sales managers that focus earlier in the sales process, helping sellers qualify prospects right, make sure they're spending their time on the right people, doing full needs discoveries, working their way up higher and getting in early in the sale. The better results come from those sales managers that are working with their sellers earlier in the sale than later in the sale.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are focusing on the prospects that can actually deliver results. So later on, there's actually more to work on at the end than at the beginning.
Right.
Many sellers do not do thorough needs discoveries. They leave a lot of money on the table because they leave a lot of value on the table. Well, did you ask them about this? Did you ask them about that? No. Or go ask them about it. Oh, I asked them about it. It's in horrible shape. It's rough. We can help them with that too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about leaving money on the table. It's about making less of a difference than you could.
Right.
So the people that are really tuned in to doing well at the front part of the selling process and are doing are focusing on those things to get everything on the right track early are much more successful than those that jump in just at the end and are only working on closing those last few deals because if they come through, they're big. If you focus early, you're going to have a much better flow at the end.
Yeah, I always like to tell people that I work with that an order is just an outcome of the process.
Mm-hmm.
If you can perfect your process, especially as you talk about in the early stages, then you're going to get the outcomes that you desire.
I agree.
But if you're too focused on the outcomes, likely not to get them. Now, the recommendations that you're talking about, do these work as much for small and mid-sized companies as big companies?
Oh, I think so, because I think if you're at a big company and you're selling for a huge company, you still have to focus on the right buyers.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to focus your time the right way. You still have to have a set of goals. And then when you're having conversations, you don't have the 53,000 people that work at your company at that sales meeting with you. It's usually you sitting across from a person who's trying to get something done, or you sitting across from a person who doesn't even know the difference you can make for them until you have a communication with them that inspires them to think, oh, I should really consider this.
Right.
It's still you and another person, or you and your pal with 3 other people on the other side. It's usually not 72 on 72. So while there are things that are advantages that big companies have, like if you're at a tiny little company, you might not have the collateral, the website, all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't really matter because at a small company, you're nimbler. You can make your own decisions.
Right.
You can do things faster. You can decide to make investments in time and energy that sometimes the big company guys are required to not do. So in general, the recommendations are the same for selling, whether you're a one-man show versus whether you are at a 50,000 person company, except as a one-man show, you're usually not working on a $17 million RFP, so you don't have to worry about it.
Not very often, at least. So what about the difference between inside sales and outside sales? We see this migration from pure outside model to a hybrid model with more inside sales. what we're talking about today, in your minds, apply as much to an inside salesperson as an outside salesperson?
Yeah, so a couple things on inside versus outside sales. The dynamics are still the same. We still need to make a personal connection. And we actually just did research that was published in our book, Insight Selling, that said that a personal connection is still really important. There's also things written right now in the Harvard Business Review that says selling is not about relationships. Well, we actually found that not only is it about relationships, but the business value that you bring, but it's also about the relationships and that the other person just likes you. Because if they didn't, they kicked you out and they didn't continue the discussion. Didn't get you the win, but without it, you lost. So that's important. Being liked is still important. Doing a thorough needs discovery, still important. Inspiring them with ideas and changing their thinking, still important. Doesn't matter whether you're on the phone or doing a web meeting versus live.
Right.
With the migration to inside sales. And why inside sales? Because you can communicate with people so much more easily. It used to just be the phone. Now we can email. Now we can see each other.
Right.
Now we can have a productive meeting where we actually make a connection because we can see each other's faces and expressions that used to take a plane ride.
Right.
The other thing that I would say is there's still a lot to be said, especially if the sale is of a certain dollar value or a certain strategic value, to go meet with people. Because if you're trying to win and it's important enough and the other guys are just on the phone, but you got on a plane and said, let me spend a day with you, you usually push yourself further in the depth of connection with them. And because you're spending time with them live, especially if you went to see them either on a plane or if it's a nice long drive, you sometimes get more than the 45-minute meeting. You'll get a couple of hours and you'll really be able to dig into things.
Right. And it's a sign of commitment that customers like relative to the relationship aspect you talked about.
Yeah, but if you want to amp up your sales, don't just sit in your car all day.
Yeah.
Because you can only have 4 meetings or 3 meetings.
Right.
Maybe have 6 meetings and do some on the phone and then make strategic decisions. So it's all about where to make the investment.
Got it. So along somewhat the same lines as a manager looking at hiring people, there's a lot being written about customers want to make decisions faster. They're feeling constrained by sort of lack of knowledge on the part of salespeople, lack of expertise. So if you were sort of where on the spectrum when you look to hire people, you're managing or advising, clients on how to hire people, is it more on the spectrum of great sales skills, or on the other hand, product expertise, industry expertise, and so on? Where do you?
So I think I would lean towards more of the best available athlete. So there are a lot of people that were crappy at selling when they were 26. And 22 years later, they have a lot more experience and they're still crappy at selling, crappy at what they do. They're just older.
Right.
So the experience doesn't necessarily translate into the knowledge. There are some industries where if they don't have the kind of background, it's very hard to sell engineering if you're not an engineer. If you weren't in construction for 16 years. I mean, so there's a certain amount of that kind of knowledge that can't be replaced.
Right.
With the skills, if I can't have a great conversation with you right now, I better be prepared to train for that in 3 months. So there are some jobs, however, where you do hire new people who haven't been in selling, where you're really not looking for skills. You're looking more for attributes. You're looking more for willingness to work, passion, communication, just naturally, when I say skills, just the ability to communicate well, the willingness to dive in and have no fear and go out and sell. So sometimes you're not looking for the skills or the knowledge. But I would say if you're trying to decide if you want more skills versus knowledge, ask yourself what you're prepared to develop really fast if you're sacrificing one for the other. So there are some companies that hire in for skill and have really good product knowledge and sales knowledge and industry knowledge training. I know one particular company we're working with right now in technology, most of the people they hire don't know enough about it, but they're the right people and they have good interaction skills and they're good senior salespeople. And I know other places where they will hire the right background and hire the right knowledge, and as long as you have the right attributes, they'll teach them core basic selling stuff. So you have to ask yourself, what are you prepared to train on? You can train on knowledge, and you can train on skills. And after you train on knowledge, they can still know nothing, and train on skills, and they can still not be better.
Right.
Both of them take a long time to really develop. So you have to ask yourself, where are you willing to invest?
And so how do you assess on the front end the types of candidates in that environment that fit that profile of somebody that is the best available athlete?
Well, I think from an assessment instrument perspective, you can assess for attributes. You can get a sense of people's work style and preferences, and you can learn a little bit about their instincts for selling. But if you really want to assess someone, you have to spend time with them. And you have to really dig in. And you have to simulate what life is like in a sales environment, in your sales environment, and get a sense of how they interact. So, for example, I'll ask some sales managers who are hiring, and I'll say, what's it like for you when you walk into a new client for the first time? They're a new prospect for the first time. And they'll say, oh, it's pretty rough, it's pretty cold. I only have 15 minutes, even though we're scheduled for an hour, they'll say. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm kind of busy. Can we get this done in 20 minutes? And they have to deal with that. And then I watch them interview, and they get up behind their desk, and they go shake the hand and say, welcome, come on in. Can I get you some coffee? Well, that's not what it's like. Have the person come in and say, I'm sorry, I know we were scheduled for an hour, but we only have 15 minutes, and see what they say.
Right.
So you have to actually simulate and get a sense of the behavioral inclinations that they have.
You have to test them.
From a knowledge perspective, you just have to grill them. If you expect them to know something, then you need to be willing to dive in like their PhD orals and grill them.
Test them.
Yeah. But you can't test them on paper, because people can answer things on paper, but then they can't do it in conversation. We don't sell to each other by, I'm going to write something down and pass it over to you, and you're going to read it. We do it in conversation.
Right.
So if they don't have what we call fluent recall, if it's not on the tips of their tongues, and they're able to weave in and synthesize all of their knowledge the right way at that moment, then they're toast.
Right. Yeah, when to your point, I think especially with insight selling, is that synthesis. I think is the ability to synthesize is extremely important, because that's sort of, to my mind, sort of the heart of being able to provide insights to people. Very cool. So, last question.
Okay.
What's the single most effective piece of advice you'd give someone, to an individual seller, to accelerate their sales? Somebody that's sort of hit a plateau. What can I do? What's that nugget that you would give them to sort of end the conversation here?
You mean besides hire Andy Paul?
Besides hire Andy Paul. Besides hire Rain Group.
Andy Paul. Okay, so besides hire Andy Paul, if they are actually at a plateau, to go talk to someone. It's very hard to dig yourself out of a hole alone. So it reminds me of the story of the guy that falls down the hole. Guy falls down the hole, and he's in this hole, and there are people walking all around him, but he's in this hole. And he says, help, I'm in the hole. And his pharmacist stops by, and he looks down and says, oh, well, hang on, let me check with your doctor. We'll see if we'll get you a prescription. And he calls the doctor, gets him a prescription, he drops him down the hole, and he leaves. All right, well, that didn't help. And then he's saying, help, I'm in the hole. His lawyer walks by, and his lawyer says, this is a travesty. I'm going to sue whoever put you down here. Don't worry, I'm going to help. And he leaves. I'm still in this hole. So he's saying, help, I'm in the hole. And then a friend comes by. And he says, I'm stuck in this hole, and I don't know what to do. And so the friend jumps in the hole. And the guy says, what are you doing? I'm in this hole. I haven't been able to figure out my way out. And the guy says, don't worry, I've been in this hole before, and I know the way out.
Yeah, like it.
So go get some help.
Very good.
If you're in the hole, have someone jump in the hole with you and see if you can't learn to find your way out.
Excellent advice. I love that story. Great story. Well, Mike, thank you very much for spending time with us today, and very, very insightful, and look forward to talking to you again.
Well, thanks a lot, Andy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.